This is an improvised story based on the randomly generated word run. Run. We begin. He pulled on his shoes, tied the laces, and set off on a crisp, cool morning. It was the wind on his face that woke him up more than the alarm by his bed, and soon the heart got racing in rhythm with his footfalls on pavement, and he knew he was alive. He ran past the corner store, past the bakery, waved at the milkman on his way by the stock exchange. Apparently they need a lot of milk at the stock exchange. And before he knew, he had come to the bridge, that fateful bridge where he'd turned his life around. For not 3 years prior, he'd lived under that bridge. And that same milkman who he waved at that morning had been driving by and his milk truck broke down. And, well, Robert, the homeless man at the time, he was in a rough way, but he knew something or two about cars. And so he walked up to that milkman, and the milkman jumped back and said, "I have nothing, please, don't hurt me." And Robert said, "I don't want to hurt you, good milk sir. I want to help you." And so he opened the hood of that fateful milk truck, and a few minutes later was as good as new, and the milkman said, You've got something, young man." And then Robert looked down and he said, "Well, the truth is, I don't have much at all, as you can see." And he pointed to where he had slept the night before. And the milkman said, "Oh, I've been there. But then I discovered my love of milk, and that took me all the way to the top of the milk game." I ruthlessly destroyed my competitors, and now I run the milk game in this town, and one day you can too. Not the milk game, because if you test me and if you try to shove in and elbow in on the milk game, I will crush you like I crushed everyone else. But choose your own game, and maybe one day you can be as successful as I am. And he gestured to his milk truck, which Robert had to admit was an absolutely glorious milk truck. It was shiny and new and clearly built with love. And the milkman, he went to the back and he pulled out a bottle and he said, "This one's on the house." And he gave Robert a nice, cool bottle of milk and got back in his milk truck and waved as he drove away and said, "Make sure it's not milk or I'll crush you," and went off into the distance. And that was a turning point in the life of Robert, and he didn't know what he was going to do. And he drank that milk sip by sip, and then he thought, well, cars, of course. I know my way around an engine. I know my way around a side mirror. I know my way around a rear view mirror. I clearly know a lot about cars. And but he didn't know how to start. How do you get started on the first rung of the ladder when you don't even have a car yourself? And he began to run. That milkman, he stopped by every day and he gave him a nice glass of milk, and he didn't have a whole lot else to eat, but he started to run along the road. And occasionally he'd come across someone whose car had broken down. And he'd say, "I can help you with that." And they said, "I have nothing to give you." And he said, "You don't have to give me anything at all." And they said, "Well, that sounds suspicious. It sounds like you want to do something to my car." And he says, "All I want to do is fix your car and get better at fixing cars, and one day I'll have a mechanic shop that you can take your car in and I'll make it the finest automobile you've ever seen. And they said, well, you're pretty intense, but you're also very confident. I don't know what's wrong with it. The tow truck is on its way. If you can fix it by the time it gets here, I'd be grateful. And he, sure enough, wouldn't take him long, and he'd fix what was wrong with that car, and, well, some people really didn't have anything to give him, but some people were so impressed and so taken aback that they did what they could. If they had a few dollars, they'd give him that. But then one man, who had a very nice car, he didn't have any money to give him, but he said, you know, you've got something, and I've got a warehouse that I was going to convert into storage space for my company, but I think we can turn part of it into a garage. What do you say you take up the management position there and start your own shop? And of course, Robert jumped at the opportunity, and just like that, he had a garage. He didn't own the garage, but he ran the garage. And that man's friends and clients and business compatriots, as they're called, they all went to him. And because, of course, their friend directed them to him, and, well, he got something of a reputation there. And sure enough, his powers grew, but it didn't stop him from running. Every morning he would wake up and run along the road. He wouldn't run along trails or running paths. He would run right along the side of the road, which is not advisable under most circumstances, but it's where he came into himself, and so he needed to continue doing it. And occasionally he'd pass by someone with a car broken down, and sure enough, he'd do what he could and fix it up, and if he couldn't do it there, he'd give him his card and say, come on, see me down at my shop. And one day, the milkman paid him a visit. This was years later, after that initial time, after where we started, when he just waved at the milkman. And his shop was doing quite well, and the milkman said, you know, I've come so far, but I don't know where to go. There are no more lands left to conquer in the milk landscape. And Robert said, well, you can partner with me. I can get into doing trucks. You know about trucks and delivery trucks. We've partnered up. I'll sponsor you. And he talked to his financial backer, and they did a partnership, and then they expanded to new cities. And more and more and more. But then one day, a man showed up at the garage. And this fellow had a dastardly look in his eye. And he said, are you Robert? And Robert said, yes, of course, clearly you know that. That's why you're here. Welcome to Milkman Motors, which is what he had called his his garage. Some people found it confusing, but he liked it as a little tip of the cap to his origins. And well, this fellow with the dastardly eye, he said, I hate milk, and I hate you. I'm Mr. T. He said, you're not Mr. T. Mr. T was a very famous mohawked, jewelry-wearing fellow from the 80s. And he said, not that Mr. T, Mr. T, T-E-A. Like I drink tea and I make tea. I like tea, not milk. And Milkman said, doesn't milk go in tea sometimes? Like people like milk in their tea. Why are you so against tea? And he said, no milk in my tea. Milk waters it down and makes it creamy. Tea should be pure, of the plants. And Robert said, I don't know why you're here. This seems like a personal thing for you. I fix cars. And Mr. T, he said, sure you fix cars, but you prop up the milk industry. Thanks to you, I see your trucks all around this town, and people are drinking milk. They're not drinking tea. And so I'm going to take you and the milkman down. I hereby declare war on the milkman and Milkman Motors. So says Mr. T. And he laughed, and he hopped on a penny farthing bicycle, Is that what they're called? The one with the giant wheel in the front and the little tiny wheel in the back. And he pedaled away, and he threw like loose leaf tea in his wake. and, Robert called the milkman as well as his financial backer, and he said, "Hey, I don't know what's going on here, or if we should take this guy seriously, but this happened today, and maybe we should up our security or something, and I don't know what to do." And the milkman said, "Oh, goodness. I was worried this would happen. I know Mr. T. He was my best friend. We grew up in Kentucky, and, well, he loved tea, and I loved milk, and he would pour tea in my milk, and I'd pour milk in his tea, and everything was grand, and we got along like, well, like milk and tea, but one day I spilled some of my milk, and he slipped in it, and he hit his head, and, well, something happened to his brain, and he was forever changed, and he seemed to think the milk that he slipped on was part of a vast conspiracy to undo him and to kill him, and since then he's thought that milk, and thereby me, was constantly trying to kill him." And Robert said, "Oh God, this seems like it goes deep. What can he do? Is he powerful at all?" And the milkman said, "Oh goodness, yes. Mr. T is the most powerful tea baron there ever was. He's traveled the world. He has tea fields and tea leaves all across the land, and a tea empire, if you will. He can target us, and he can take us down. Tea is a nasty business. Their marketing and public image is very wholesome and cozy, but my goodness, the dark underbelly of tea is something to behold." And Robert said, "Well, then I suppose there's only one thing to do." And he went to his workshop, and he took all of the milkman's trucks, and he just went to town on those things. He started outfitting them with elaborate traps and weapons, and all of them, of course, milk-based. You know, he had an the thing in the back that if you pulled a lever, a bunch of super goopy milk would come out and be like an oil slick to anyone chasing them. And of course, he had milk cannons, which were just giant water cannons that shot milk out of the sides. And he also had a sonic boom machine off the top of it that could be directed in various directions, and you activate it, and a loud cow's moo would bellow out with sonic reverberations that would just cripple whoever they were aimed at with nausea. And he also just made them tanks, essentially, like super defensive, and thick 2-inch steel on all the sides of the milk trucks. And after his mad frenzy in the shop, it was a full month he had these. He locked himself away. The milkman came, and he said, "My goodness, we might have a chance." And Mr. T had left a note, and he said, "We will end this war between milk and tea at New Year's Day, at the break of dawn. Meet me in the tea fields of Kentucky, where this all began." I don't think they make any tea in Kentucky, but in this story there's a vast history of tea in Kentucky. And so Robert and the milkman and all of the drivers of the milk trucks, they took their place in their milk trucks, and they rode them to the tea fields of Kentucky. And as daybreak crept over the horizon on New Year's Day, he heard a whisper and a rustle in the grasses far beyond. and he saw coming over the horizon a horde of just jagged trucks with huge stalks of tea leaves, and the men like bowing back and forth like in Mad Max on these big rustly tea leaves, and they started singing a song that chilled Robert to the bone. And Mr. T was riding tall at the front of the procession, and he said, "Milkman, this ends today. On the count of 3, unleash tea." And he counted down, and upon the arrival of 0, just a giant horn rang out, and the milk trucks and the tea trucks just came at each other violently, and the men going off on the big tea stalks, they would go by and they'd throw dried powdered tea leaves into the eyes of the milk trucks, and the milk trucks would be blasting the milk cannons to shoot the people off the tea, and they'd also just have these huge wind powered, these giant fans like fan boat fans, and they'd be blowing tea leaves everywhere. And Mr. T, he had a big glass of tea, like a giant goblet, basically. Yeah, like a king's goblet. It was made of gold, just filled with tea. And, well, the milkman was at the forefront of this, and as the battle raged on, he was in the thick of everything, and of course Mr. T targeted him most of all. And Mr. T was driven mad with rage, and he leapt from his big throne atop the front of a giant tea war machine onto the milkman's carriage. It was an open end. It was like a milk truck, but they took the top off so they could command the various milk trucks. Mr. T, he landed inside the truck, and they battled each other inside the milk truck with fists. This had devolved. There was no more tea and no more milk. It was just all fighting. And, well, the truck rolled over. They couldn't control it, and they were both thrown. And Milkman looked over, and he saw Mr. T had been wounded by his own tea leaves. They were jagged and hard. They'd been crystallized somehow, and he looked bad. He was bleeding heavily, and he said, bring me in my dying moments some tea." And Milkman said, "Of course, you're my oldest enemy, but you're also my oldest friend." And everyone saw this happening, and they quieted down, and the battle stopped, and they all gathered round, and the milkman said, "Give me that goblet." And Robert took the goblet, and he gave it to the milkman, and he saw in the goblet there was tea leaves, but in the fray some milk had also gotten in there, and there was no water anywhere, and so he didn't know what to do, and all he could do was bring it to the lips of Mr. T, who looked up, and he saw it, and he was initially skeptical. But he took a drink, and he said, "My God, I haven't had a sip of milk since that fateful day all those decades ago, but this is the most delicious thing I've ever had, the most delectable taste I have ever beheld. I am sorry, old friend. I am sorry for my vendetta. We must do something with this." And Milkman said, "We will, because I'm not going to let you die, Mr. T." And Robert, he was a mechanic, but he knew the inner workings of man just as much as he knew the inner workings of a car, of a machine, and he fixed up Mr. T Just like he went under the hood of a car to fix up an engine, he fixed up the intestines and everything that was messed up in Mr. T, and together they nursed him back to health with milk and tea, and they joined forces, Mr. T and the milkman, and also Robert, and they created a milk tea empire, the likes of which had never been seen anywhere in the world, and it was the most delicious thing anyone had ever had, and they all gathered together and realized that why are we apart? Why are we separated? Why do we have these vendettas against each other? You can like both milk and tea, and aren't we so much more delicious when we're together? And we allow each other to love one another. And that's what milk tea is. Love and friendship. The end. Man, the arrival of Mr. T sent that story in a crazy direction. I'm here for it. All right, there we go. What do we call that one? Man and Machine, Milk and Tea, the Milk Tea War? Sure. Yeah, the Milk Tea War. Let's go with that. All right, the end. There we go. If you like this, go ahead and like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.